In life, chaos is not a possibility, it is a guarantee. The storms will come and the waves will crash, but your response, that is entirely within your control. Calmness in the face of disorder is not weakness, it is mastery. Chaos is not just an occasional disruption in life, it is embedded into the very fabric of existence. From the unpredictability of nature to the complexity of human relationships, chaos emerges constantly and without warning. No amount of planning can fully insulate us from the unknown because we live in a world that is, at its core, only partially ordered. The rest of it, much of it, is uncertainty, and that uncertainty is what we refer to as chaos. Understanding this fundamental truth is the first step toward maturity. It is not pessimism, it is realism. People often grow anxious because they hold a subconscious expectation that life should be calm, that if they do everything right, things should go smoothly. But that's a flawed assumption. Life doesn't promise ease, it promises challenge, it demands adaptation. The key, then, is not to try to eliminate chaos, because that is futile, but to develop within yourself the capacity to remain composed while standing in the middle of it. Calmness in the face of uncertainty is not natural, it must be earned. It must be cultivated through conscious effort, repeated exposure, and internal transformation. You don't inherit calmness, you construct it. This calmness is a psychological fortress. It is not built on arrogance or denial of reality. Rather, it is built on the humble and courageous recognition that, no matter how bad a situation becomes, you can respond to it in a way that preserves your clarity and self-control. You can choose not to collapse under the weight of fear or confusion. You can choose to regulate your breathing, steady your thoughts, and ground your emotions. That choice is the foundation of calm. But let's be clear, calm is not apathy. It's not a form of emotional suppression or detachment. Calmness is control. It's the ability to remain deliberate when your instincts push you toward panic. It's what separates the emotionally resilient from the easily overwhelmed. And that emotional resilience, that psychological stability, is one of the most valuable traits you can develop in a complex and volatile world. Developing calmness begins with exposure. Voluntarily facing small forms of chaos, conflict, uncertainty, failure, teaches your nervous system how to tolerate discomfort. It's like weight training for the mind. You start with manageable loads. Over time, you grow stronger. If you never face stress intentionally, you'll remain fragile. But if you deliberately expose yourself to challenge, you gain competence, and with competence comes confidence. Another path to calmness is structure. Human beings thrive when they bring order to the areas of life they can control. This might mean creating a daily routine, keeping your living space organized, or maintaining healthy habits. These small acts of order act as anchors during times of disorder. They give you psychological stability, a point of reference amidst the storm. Furthermore, calmness is reinforced through meaning. If you have a purpose, something larger than yourself, you are far less likely to be shaken by temporary chaos. Purpose aligns your actions, gives you direction, and keeps you grounded when everything around you seems to be falling apart. Viktor Frankl, the great psychologist and Holocaust survivor, observed that those who survived the horrors of concentration camps were not necessarily the strongest physically, but those who had a reason to endure. Meaning sustains calm. It reminds you that there is something worth enduring for. Moreover, your physiological state cannot be ignored. The mind and body are deeply connected. A calm mind resides more easily in a regulated body. Sleep, nutrition, physical activity, and controlled breathing directly influence your mental state. If you neglect your body, you compromise your capacity for calmness. Simple practices like deep diaphragmatic breathing can lower cortisol, reduce heart rate, and anchor your mind in the present. These are not superficial tricks. They are biological tools that reinforce psychological strength. Lastly, we must talk about responsibility. Calmness grows when you accept responsibility for your inner world. You stop blaming the world for your emotional reactions and instead take ownership of them. You understand that although you can't control what happens, you can control how you interpret and respond. This doesn't mean you deny your emotions. It means you observe them, understand them, and choose not to be enslaved by them. This is difficult work. It requires maturity, discipline, and honesty. But if you commit to it, if you choose to face life with your eyes open, and with a heart that refuses to collapse into victimhood, then calmness will slowly become your default posture, not because the world has become less chaotic, but because you have become more ordered. That is the essence of strength, not the absence of chaos, but the presence of calm within it. The storm will rage, that is certain, but you, through preparation, exposure, structure, meaning, and responsibility, can learn to stand in its center unwavering. That is what it means to be composed and ultimately to be free. Most people believe that emotional control is something you either have or you don't, that some are naturally calm, composed, and in control of their inner world, while others are simply emotional or reactive. But this assumption is incorrect and dangerously limiting. Emotional discipline is not a fixed trait handed to a select few at birth. It is a skill. Like any skill, it can be developed, refined, and strengthened through practice, intention, and repetition. Imagine someone playing the piano with grace and fluidity. It would be foolish to assume they were born with that ability. What you're seeing is the result of countless hours of structured training, of mistakes corrected, and of deliberate practice. Emotional discipline works the same way. It's not talent, it's training. Your ability to regulate your emotions under pressure is not a mysterious gift. It is the cumulative result of how you've responded to discomfort in the past, how you've been taught to interpret adversity, and whether you've made the choice to confront your emotions rather than escape them. Every time you pause before reacting in anger, every time you breathe through anxiety rather than avoid it, you are training your nervous system. You are literally shaping the circuitry of your brain to become more resilient, more stable, and more capable. Modern neuroscience supports this idea. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive functioning, rational thought, and self-control, gains strength through use. The more you practice emotional regulation, the more efficient and automatic it becomes. Emotional discipline is not just a psychological phenomenon, it's a physical process. You are wiring yourself for self-mastery, but skill building requires effort. It is not glamorous and it is not easy. It often begins in small, unimpressive moments, choosing to stay calm in a traffic jam, deciding not to escalate an argument, resisting the urge to catastrophize when things don't go as planned. These are the mental push-ups. These are the repetitions that build the emotional musculature needed to face greater storms. The myth that emotional people are inherently weaker, or that stoic individuals are simply born that way, is damaging. It suggests that personal change is impossible. It also excuses laziness. But once you accept that emotional discipline is a skill, you also accept that you have a responsibility to develop it. You can no longer say, "That's just how I am." You must instead ask, "What am I doing to improve?" That shift from fixed mindset to growth mindset is transformative. It's also important to recognize that emotional discipline does not mean suppression. It is not the denial or rejection of emotion. Rather, it is the proper organization of emotion. Emotions are signals. They contain information, but they are not instructions. Just because you feel anger does not mean you must lash out. Just because you feel fear does not mean you must retreat. The disciplined individual listens to emotion, learns from it, and then decides how to act in alignment with their values, not their impulses. This process requires self-awareness. You cannot control what you are not aware of. Many people live in a state of reactivity, unaware of what triggers them or why they respond the way they do. Developing emotional discipline begins with observation. Begin to notice your emotions in real time. Name them, track their sources, ask yourself, what is this emotion trying to tell me? What thought is fueling it? What pattern is repeating itself here? Then interrupt the automaticity, create a pause. Breathe, reframe, respond deliberately. This is the essence of discipline, action governed by principle, not impulse, and the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Over time, you begin to feel less like a passenger in your own life and more like the one holding the steering wheel. Also worth noting, emotional discipline is context-specific and situationally adaptive. You're not aiming to feel nothing. You're aiming to feel appropriately. A calm, regulated person is not cold or disconnected. They are simply measured. They don't allow temporary emotions to dictate permanent decisions. They don't crumble under pressure or collapse into chaos when things go wrong. They remain clear, headed, not because they are numb, but because they are trained. And the benefits are profound. Emotionally disciplined individuals lead more stable lives. Their relationships are healthier. Their decision-making is sharper. Their leadership is stronger. They are less likely to be manipulated, less likely to act out of fear, and more likely to endure hardship without breaking. They are capable of holding responsibility because they are not slaves to their own emotional volatility. But perhaps the greatest reward is this, peace. When you learn to govern your inner world, the outer world loses its power to disturb you. You stop reacting to every offense, every setback, every fluctuation in your mood or environment. You develop a center, a psychological spine, and from that center you can face the unpredictable nature of life with courage, with wisdom, and with grace. So don't fall for the illusion that emotional control is beyond your reach. It is not something you are given. It is something you build with time, with effort, with humility. Emotional discipline is one of the highest forms of strength, not because it looks impressive from the outside, but because of what it requires from the inside: honesty, commitment, and the daily decision to rise above yourself. The human mind is remarkably adaptable, yet most people underestimate its capacity for growth. They treat their mental state as something static, unchangeable, hardwired, permanent. But this is a misunderstanding of both human psychology and neurobiology. The mind is not fixed. It is plastic. It is trainable, and like a muscle, it either grows stronger through intentional effort, or it atrophies through neglect and passivity. This concept, mental training, requires a reorientation of how we view thought itself. Most people assume their thoughts are simply reactions to external circumstances. Something happens, and the mind responds. But this passive model of thinking misses the critical truth. The mind is not just a responder, it is also a shaper of experience. Your thoughts don't just reflect your life, they actively structure it. So if your thinking is undisciplined, anxious, chaotic, or self-destructive, then your life will begin to mirror those patterns. Training the mind begins with this understanding: you are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts, and because you are the observer, you have the capacity to step back, reflect, and restructure them. That is where mental strength is born, not in blind reaction, but in the deliberate shaping of how you interpret, engage with, and respond to reality. Consider how physical strength is built. You place the body under tension. You lift weights, you push the limits of your muscles. That resistance breaks the muscle tissue down, and through rest and nutrition, it grows back stronger. The same principle applies to your mind. When you face intellectual or emotional challenges, when you are pushed out of your comfort zone, you are training your cognitive and emotional capacity. You're teaching your brain to endure difficulty, to focus amidst chaos, to solve problems under pressure. This is not comfortable, but it is necessary. If you avoid mental discomfort, you stay mentally weak. If you constantly distract yourself with entertainment, avoid difficult conversations, or retreat from intellectual complexity, you remain fragile. A strong mind, on the other hand, is forged through friction. It's developed by reading things that are challenging to understand, by confronting truths that are uncomfortable, by sitting with emotions that are painful, and by asking questions that don't have easy answers. Repetition matters, consistency matters, just as one trip to the gym won't change your physique, one moment of clarity won't build a powerful mind. Mental strength is cumulative. It's built slowly, incrementally, through daily habits. This might look like journaling your thoughts to increase self-awareness, meditating to strengthen focus, or reading complex literature to stretch your intellect. Every small act of cognitive effort contributes to the development of mental resilience. Discipline also plays a crucial role. The mind resists focus by default. It's drawn toward distraction, toward ease, toward what's familiar and comfortable. Training your mind requires resisting those impulses. It means choosing concentration over distraction, patience over immediate gratification, and truth over emotional convenience. This is not an easy process, but it is a deeply rewarding one. The benefits are profound. A trained mind is less reactive. It sees patterns where others see only chaos. It can delay gratification, endure suffering with purpose, and make decisions with clarity even under pressure. It becomes a tool for navigating complexity rather than a liability that buckles under it. When your mind is strong, you are less at the mercy of the environment because you have internal structure. It's also important to acknowledge that mental training is not just about intellectual exercises. It includes emotional regulation. Emotional fitness and cognitive fitness are intertwined. A trained mind can identify emotional triggers, analyze them without being overwhelmed, and respond from principle rather than impulse. This is what allows people to remain calm in crisis, compassionate in conflict, and rational in uncertainty. This kind of training often begins with awareness. You cannot change what you do not recognize. You have to study your own thinking, track your patterns, challenge your assumptions, question the narratives you've accepted about yourself. Is your inner voice helping you or harming you? Is it pushing you toward competence or keeping you trapped in fear? Training the mind involves taking responsibility for those inner dialogues and reshaping them through evidence, reason, and conscious intention. And it's important to set goals for your thinking, just like you would for your physical body. If you want a stronger body, you identify weak points and work on them. Likewise, if you want a stronger mind, you identify mental weaknesses. Maybe it's impatience, self-doubt, pessimism, or cognitive laziness, and you begin to challenge them deliberately. You expose yourself to situations that demand growth. You don't wait for motivation. You build discipline. A well-trained mind doesn't just help you think better, it helps you live better. It enables you to build healthier relationships, pursue meaningful goals, confront your fears, and contribute value to the world. It becomes the foundation for a life of order, strength, and integrity. So treat your mind as something you are responsible for, not something that just happens to you. Understand that it is not fully formed. It is not finished. It is not beyond your influence. With effort, focus, and discipline, you can shape it into a tool of extraordinary power and precision. That is both your challenge and your opportunity. In a world increasingly dominated by speed, noise, and urgency, stillness has become a rare and misunderstood quality. To most, stillness appears passive, maybe even weak, an absence of motion, of energy, of drive. But that is a shallow interpretation. True stillness, especially under pressure, is not the lack of action. It is the controlled withholding of chaos. It is the silent power of a person who remains centered when everything around them is falling apart. Pressure reveals character when individuals are pushed, When uncertainty strikes, when expectations rise, when fear sets in, their instincts often take control. They rush, react, lash out, collapse. They confuse movement with progress and noise with influence. But this kind of frantic energy, born of anxiety or panic, rarely produces meaningful results. More often, it leads to poor decisions, fractured relationships, and unnecessary suffering. Strength in such moments is not about doing more. It's about maintaining internal alignment. It's about not letting the storm dictate your direction. Stillness is what allows you to think clearly when clarity matters most. It is the space between stimulus and response, the moment in which you can choose your actions rather than be driven by emotion. When you are still under pressure, you are not avoiding the weight of the moment. You are carrying it with conscious effort. You're choosing to let your principles, not your panic, determine your behavior. This form of strength is not natural. It is trained, and it requires the development of a certain internal posture, a mental spine, if you will, that does not buckle under stress. It starts with the understanding that reactivity is not the same as responsiveness. Reactivity is automatic, primitive. It's the fight or flight system unchecked. Responsiveness, on the other hand, requires awareness. It asks you to stay present, to observe your emotions without immediately obeying them, and to respond with intention. Stillness, therefore, is the gateway to wisdom. When you are calm, you can hear more clearly, both internally and externally. You can assess a situation for what it is, not what your anxiety claims it to be. You gain perspective. You separate what matters from what's noise. You think about consequences, about timing, about impact. None of that is possible when your mind is frantically spinning or your body is flooded with stress hormones. Now, many people confuse stillness with inaction, but that's not what we're talking about. Stillness does not mean indecision or paralysis. It means stability. A still person under pressure can act, but they act from principle, not desperation. They speak, but they speak with precision, not aggression. They move, but they do so deliberately, not compulsively. In this sense, stillness is a form of poise. It is readiness restrained by discipline. You can see this in elite performers, athletes at the highest level, surgeons in the middle of a critical operation, soldiers in combat. The ones who perform well under pressure are not the ones who let adrenaline take full control. They are the ones who slow things down internally, who narrow their focus, who breathe and execute their training with calm precision. Their stillness is not a void. It is a container for immense power. Without it, that power would become scattered, misdirected, and ultimately destructive. Stillness also communicates strength to others. In leadership, the calm person becomes an anchor for the group. When followers sense that their leader is grounded, not rattled, they feel safer. They think more clearly. They make better decisions. Panic is contagious, but so is poise. One person's stillness in a tense moment can shift the entire tone of a conversation, a team, even a crisis. And that kind of influence is the hallmark of true strength. Not domination, not bravado, but quiet, steady control. Practicing stillness starts in everyday life. It begins when you choose to pause before replying in anger, when you take a breath before jumping to conclusions, when you allow silence to exist in a conversation instead of filling it with unnecessary words. These are small exercises, but they are powerful. Each one is a repetition in the discipline of stillness, and like muscle, this discipline grows with use. Stillness also grows through reflection. People who constantly distract themselves through noise, entertainment, or busyness never learn how to be still because they never allow themselves to sit in the discomfort of silence. But silence is necessary. It is in silence that you sort your thoughts, that you align your values, that you hear the deeper voice within, the one not driven by fear, but by truth. If you avoid that voice, you will always be a victim of your own reactions. In a world that celebrates speed and visibility, stillness is often invisible, but its effects are profound. The ability to be still under pressure gives you an edge psychologically, emotionally, and strategically. It allows you to endure what others cannot. It allows you to think when others lose their minds. It allows you to lead when others fall apart. And so, if you want to become strong, not just physically or intellectually, but existentially, you must train stillness. You must learn to calm the internal storm so that, when the external storm comes, you're not carried away by it. That is power, that is responsibility, and in the end, that is freedom. There is a fundamental error embedded in how many people relate to their own minds. They assume that because they think something, it must be true. They mistake thoughts for facts, internal narratives for objective reality, and feelings for truth. But this is a dangerous confusion. The mind is not a perfect instrument. It is fallible, biased, emotional, and shaped by countless influences, genetic, cultural, familial, and experiential. To take your thoughts at face value without scrutiny is to build your life on a foundation that is unstable and often misleading. Your thoughts are not always accurate. In fact, many of them are distorted by fear, habit, insecurity, trauma, and faulty reasoning. They may reflect your emotional state, not the facts of your situation. They may exaggerate danger, minimize opportunity, or reinforce a world that keeps you stuck in the very suffering you're trying to escape. If you do not learn to examine and challenge your thoughts, you become a prisoner of your own mind. Thoughts are like stories the brain tells itself to make sense of the world. And like all stories, some are well crafted and grounded in reality, while others are irrational, outdated, or even delusional. For example, you might think, "I always fail," or "nobody respects me," or "I'm not capable of doing anything meaningful." These are not facts. They are beliefs, interpretations, and they deserve to be questioned, especially if they are producing misery or holding you back. One of the most powerful things you can do is step outside of your thinking and treat your thoughts as hypotheses, not conclusions. A hypothesis is something to be tested, explored, put under pressure. This mindset invites curiosity instead of judgment. Ask yourself, is this thought true? Can I prove it? What evidence supports it? And what contradicts it? Is there another way to interpret this situation? These questions are not just psychological tricks. They are acts of intellectual courage. They are the building blocks of a mature, autonomous mind. This process of examining your thoughts is especially critical under stress, because pressure tends to amplify distortion. When you're anxious, your brain leans toward catastrophizing, imagining worst-case scenarios. When you're sad, it filters for hopelessness. When you're angry, it reduces complex people to caricatures. In each case, your thoughts feel convincing, but feeling true and being true are not the same. Emotionally charged thoughts are the ones most in need of examination, not blind acceptance. Cognitive behavioral psychology has long taught this principle, that the way we think about events shapes our emotional experience more than the events themselves. If you believe you're worthless, you will feel despair, even if the external evidence says otherwise. If you believe no one can be trusted, you will feel isolated, even if people around you are offering genuine connection. So the mind becomes a lens, not a mirror. It does not just reflect reality, it shapes it. That's why cleaning that lens through questioning and refinement is so essential. Challenging your thoughts is not the same as denying your feelings. In fact, it is the opposite. It is the process of honoring your feelings enough to seek their source and ask whether the thought fueling them is accurate or distorted. Often, it's not about turning off a negative thought. It's about transforming it. For example, instead of thinking, "I'm going to fail," You might reframe it as, "This is difficult and I might struggle, but I've overcome challenges before." That's not wishful thinking. That's balanced, evidence-based thinking. And it leads to more constructive behavior and emotional resilience. There's also a moral dimension to this discipline. When you fail to challenge destructive thoughts, you don't just harm yourself, you risk harming others. If you believe someone is your enemy based on one interaction and never examine that belief, you may act in ways that damage relationships, perpetuate conflict, or even justify cruelty. Challenging your thoughts keeps you honest. It prevents your mind from becoming a tool of resentment, paranoia, or self-pity. Of course, challenging your thoughts is uncomfortable. It requires humility. It means accepting that you might be wrong, that your view of the world or of yourself is flawed. But this discomfort is productive. It is the price of growth. People who never challenge their thoughts never grow beyond their past. They relive the same emotional cycles, make the same mistakes, and reinforce the same narratives, even if those narratives are decades out of date. Developing the habit of examining your thoughts also builds mental agility. You become less rigid, more adaptive, more nuanced in your thinking. You stop seeing the world in binary terms, success or failure, good or bad, friend or enemy, and start embracing complexity. That complexity is what reality demands, and only a mind that can handle ambiguity, contradiction, and uncertainty without collapsing into cynicism or despair can thrive in such a world. Ultimately, your thoughts shape your destiny. If they go unexamined, they can sabotage it. But if they are challenged, refined, and aligned with truth, they become tools for strength, clarity, and meaningful action. So do not trust every thought you have. Interrogate them, test them, learn from them, replace the faulty ones. That is how you transform not only your mind, but your life. And so, in a world marked by noise, urgency, and unpredictability, the most powerful thing you can do is train your mind to remain calm, not by accident, not by temperament, but by discipline. Calmness is not the absence of problems. It's the presence of a well-ordered mind in the midst of them. You begin by recognizing that chaos is inevitable. Life will test you through failure, rejection, loss, conflict, uncertainty. But how you respond to that chaos will either shape you into someone capable of bearing responsibility and creating order, or it will break you. Your task is to voluntarily confront that chaos, to expose yourself to challenge in measured doses, and to become the kind of person who does not panic, even when others do. Like a muscle, your mind strengthens through repetition, through stress that is endured and reflected upon. Stillness under pressure becomes not a lack of energy, but a form of focused power, and through all of it, you must remain aware that not every thought is a fact. The untrained mind is a dangerous place. It will lie to you, trap you, and limit you unless you learn to question it. Train your mind to observe, not just react, to pause, not just push, to challenge, not just obey. Because when your mind becomes calm, focused, and well-structured, you are no longer at the mercy of external conditions. You become capable of facing life not with fear, but with clarity, courage, and truth, and that, ultimately, is the foundation of all strength.